The fate of Earth wasn't supposed to rest on a man who forgot how to breathe. Caspian Vance stood before the great obsidian arch of the Valerion Hegemony, his pulse drumming a frantic rhythm against his collar. Behind him lay 3 centuries of human expansion. Before him sat a being whose single nod could incinerate a solar system. The air in the throne room tasted of ozone and ancient spice, a scent that felt like it was vibrating in his very marrow. He had been trained for 3 years. He had memorized 4,000 pages of xenoetiquette. He knew precisely which degree of a bow signified submissive respect versus equals in trade. But the moment the heavy, gravity-defying doors drifted apart, every single lesson evaporated. The Empress Elara did not look like the terrifying insectoid overlord the propaganda vids had depicted. She sat atop a throne of living, glowing coral, her skin a shimmering, iridescent silver that seemed to catch the ambient light and refract it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Her eyes were pools of deep, swirling violet, echoing the nebulae of the Andromeda void. As Caspian stepped forward, the sound of his own boots on the polished floor felt like thunderclaps. He was a mere envoy, a speck of dust in the presence of a supernova. The Royal Arbiter, a towering figure with 4 arms and a voice like grinding tectonic plates, stepped forward. "Presenting Envoy Caspian Vance of the United Earth Coalition," the Arbiter announced, the vibration of the words rattling Caspian's teeth. "He comes to plead for the salvation of his sector." "Envoy, prostrate yourself before the eternal radiance." Caspian moved to kneel, but his legs felt like lead. He looked up, breaking the cardinal rule of Valerian diplomacy. He made direct eye contact. In that moment, the terrifying power of the hegemony faded, replaced by a raw, staggering realization. She wasn't just a ruler. She was the most breathtaking thing he had ever seen in any corner of the galaxy. "Hold on before we get into the real stuff, I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments." The silence in the room stretched from uncomfortable to lethal. The guards gripped their pulse spears. The Arbiter's eyes narrowed, sensing the defiance. Caspian knew he should speak the scripted greeting. He should beg for the mining rights of the Orion Belt. He should play the diplomat. Instead, his mouth opened, and a truth he couldn't suppress tumbled out into the cold, regal air. "I'm sorry," Caspian whispered, his voice cracking but carrying through the silent hall. "I had a whole speech prepared about trade routes and mineral yields. But I've completely forgotten it. You're so beautiful. I can't even remember my own name, let alone my mission." A collective gasp hissed through the chamber. The guards took a step forward, their weapons humming with lethal energy. No one spoke to the Empress like that. It wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was considered a psychic assault to address her with such casual, raw intimacy. Caspian braced for the sensation of being turned into atoms. He looked at Elara, expecting fury. Instead, something impossible happened. The Empress's silver skin began to ripple. A deep, pulsing glow of fuchsia started at her neckline and raced up to her cheeks, turning her entire face a brilliant, glowing shade of rose. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a starship. The Royal Arbiter's lower set of arms reached for a ceremonial blade, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and offense. In the Valerian hegemony, the Empress was a celestial Constantoni, unreachable and divine. To suggest she possessed a physical form capable of being beautiful was to humanize a goddess. It was the ultimate blasphemy. Caspian felt the cold sweat prickling his neck. He saw the guards leveling their pulse spears, the tips glowing with a deadly azure hum. He was 1 second away from becoming a cautionary tale in a history book. But his eyes remained locked on Elara. The fuchsia glow wasn't fading. It was intensifying, pulsing in sync with what he realized was her own quickening heartbeat. "Envoy," the Arbiter's voice was a low, dangerous growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "You have stained the sanctity of the throne room with your primitive, mammalian impulses. You will retract your words and beg for a swift end, or the coalition will pay for your insolence in fire. Caspian's mind screamed at him to apologize, to blame it on a translator malfunction, to lie. But as he looked at the Empress, he saw something no diplomat had ever reported. Her violet eyes weren't filled with rage. They were wide, shimmering with a vulnerability that looked remarkably human. The Empress Elara slowly raised a hand. It was a slender, elegant limb that seemed to be carved from moonlight. With a single sharp gesture, the guards froze. The Arbiter's blade stayed in its sheath, though his confusion was palpable. "Peace, Arbiter," she said. Her voice wasn't the booming command Caspian had expected. It was melodic, like the resonance of a glass harp, but it carried a slight, unmistakable tremor. The human speaks differently than the others. They usually come with spreadsheets and trembling knees. They treat me like a mountain they have to climb or a storm they have to survive. She leaned forward, the living coral of her throne shifting to accommodate her movement. The rose-colored glow on her cheeks deepened to a vivid neon pink. It was a bioluminescent reaction, a physical manifestation of an emotion her species had spent millennia suppressing in the name of logic and empire. "You find this beautiful?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a secret shared across a vacuum. She gestured to her own iridescent skin, the sharp, crystalline features that made her look more like a sculpture than a living being. "My people see efficiency. My enemies see doom. No one has ever looked at me and lost their words, Envoy Caspian. It is an inefficient use of oxygen." Caspian took a step forward, ignoring the frantic warning glares from the Arbiter. "Maybe it's inefficient," he said, his voice gaining a sudden reckless confidence. "But where I come from, efficiency is for machines. Humans were built for the things that don't make sense. And looking at you right now, logic is the last thing on my mind." The Empress stood up. It was a slow, fluid motion that commanded the entire room's gravity. The pink glow began to spread down her arms, swirling in intricate patterns that looked like nebulae being born. She descended the stairs of her dais, each step bringing her closer to the man who had just insulted her entire civilization by calling her pretty. The Arbiter stepped in her path, his voice hushed and urgent. "Your Radiance, this is a breach of the First Edict. You cannot allow a planetary representative to bypass the protocols of the sacred distance. He is a biological hazard to your dignity." Elara didn't even look at her advisor. She walked past him as if he were a ghost. She stopped exactly 3 inches from Caspian. He could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, a gentle rhythmic heat that smelled of rain on hot stone. Up close, her beauty was overwhelming, a sensory overload that made his head swim. She reached out, her glowing fingers hovering just a fraction of an inch from his cheek. "In my culture," she whispered, her violet eyes searching his, "to turn this color is a sign of a massive systemic failure. It means the internal filters have broken. It means I am exposed." "On Earth," Caspian replied, his heart hammering against his ribs, "we call it blushing. And it's usually the sign that something wonderful is about to happen." The Empress tilted her head, a stray lock of her silver hair brushing against his forehead. "And what," she asked, her voice a soft challenge, "is the wonderful thing that follows such a failure of logic?" Caspian didn't answer with words. He knew the guards were watching. He knew the cameras were broadcasting this to the high councils of both worlds. But the tension in the room had shifted from a threat of war to something much more volatile, a spark of something ancient and forbidden. Just as he was about to speak, a sudden piercing alarm blared through the throne room. The walls turned a deep, warning red, and the Arbiter let out a strangled cry of horror. "The Hegemony High Guard!" the Arbiter shouted, his face contorted in fear. "They've detected the Empress's biosignature shift. They think she's being poisoned by a human bioweapon. They're coming to execute the Envoy." The air in the throne room didn't just turn cold, it turned lethal. Above them, the massive crystalline dome of the ceiling began to rotate, the heavy gears grinding like the teeth of a starving god. Red emergency lights bathed the silver walls in the color of fresh blood. Outside, the hum of heavy interceptors began to rattle the very foundations of the palace. The High Guard, the elite, emotionless protectors of the Valerian bloodline, were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to sanitize the room. "Your Radiance, move away from the biological hazard." The Arbiter screamed, his forearms flailing in a panicked blur of motion. "The sensors indicate a massive neurochemical spike. His presence is melting your composure. It's a targeted pheromonal strike." Caspian didn't move. He couldn't. The Empress Elara was still inches from him, her neon pink glow pulsing faster now, mirroring the frantic red of the alarm lights. For a species that prided itself on being as cold and calculated as a vacuum, this sudden influx of color was the equivalent of a catastrophic engine failure. To the automated defense systems, Elara wasn't blushing. She was under a biological siege. "They'll kill you before you can explain," Elara whispered, her violet eyes darting toward the heavy reinforced doors that were already beginning to hiss open. "My guard does not understand beauty. They understand threat levels. And right now, Caspian Vance, you are the highest threat level this sector has seen in 1,000 years." Caspian looked at the doors. He could see the silhouettes of the High Guard monstrous, 7-foot-tall suits of power armor, their heavy pulse cannons already whirring to life. He had come here to save Earth from a trade embargo, and now he was going to start an interstellar war, because he couldn't keep his mouth shut about a girl's eyes. "Then let them see it," Caspian said, his voice surprisingly steady. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and did the unthinkable. He didn't just stand near her. He took the Empress's hand. The touch was electric. It felt like grabbing a live wire wrapped in silk. The moment their skin met, the Empress's pink glow flared into a blinding radiant white, the color of a star going supernova. The Arbiter let out a strangled shriek and shielded his eyes. The High Guard froze in the doorway, their targeting lasers dancing across Caspian's chest, but their processors were lagging. They were programmed to respond to aggression, to weapons, to poison. They had no subroutines for a human holding their Empress's hand with the tenderness of a lover. "You are insane," Elara breathed, her fingers tightening around his. "The thermal energy I am radiating right now should be blistering your skin. Why are you still holding on?" "Because on Earth," Caspian grinned, though the sweat was pouring down his face, "we have a saying. If you're going to go out making a statement. And I'd rather die holding the hand of the most beautiful woman in the galaxy than living a long life pretending I didn't see you for who you really are." The lead guard stepped forward, his voice a synthesized, metallic boom. "Identify the weapon. The Empress's temperature is reaching critical levels. Release her or be vaporized." The cannons leveled. The red dots of the snipers converged on Caspian's forehead. He felt the heat from Elara's skin intensifying, a literal fever of forbidden emotion. The Arbiter was already reciting the Valerian death rites. But Elara didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped in front of Caspian, shielding his smaller, fragile frame with her own glowing body. She turned to her guards, her voice no longer a whisper, but a command that shook the obsidian pillars. "Stand down!" She roared, "This is not a weapon. This is a revelation." The guards hesitated, their mechanical brains churning through the logic of an empress defending her supposed assassin. The tension was a physical weight, a wire pulled so tight it was about to snap. "Your Radiance," the lead guard stammered, his armor hissing as it vented steam. "The sensors. They say you are dying of joy." "We do not have a protocol for joy." "Then it is time," Elara said, turning back to Caspian with a smile that could have restarted a dead sun, "that we write a new one." But as the guards lowered their weapons, a new sound echoed through the chamber. A cold, mocking laughter that didn't come from the guards or the Arbiter. It came from the shadows of the balcony above, where a figure cloaked in shifting shadows watched the entire scene with predatory hunger. The laughter didn't just echo. It seemed to drain the light from the room. High above, on the translucent obsidian balcony, stood High Chancellor Varkas. He was the architect of the hegemony's isolationist laws, a man whose heart was rumored to be made of the same cold vacuum as the space between galaxies. He looked down at the Empress and the human envoy, his 4 eyes squinting in a mixture of disgust and calculated triumph. "How touching," Varkas sneered, his voice amplified by the gravity wells of the chamber. The eternal radiance reduced to a flickering candle by a primitive from a mudball planet. "You speak of joy, Elara, but the High Council sees only a biological malfunction. A queen who cannot control her own light is a queen who cannot rule an empire." Caspian felt the Empress's hand tighten around his. The neon pink glow on her skin flickered, turning a jagged, nervous violet. Varkas wasn't just an advisor. He was the head of the traditionalist faction. He had been waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in the Empress's divine facade. And Caspian had just handed him a sledgehammer. "The first edict is clear," Varkas continued, stepping toward the edge of the balcony. "Any ruler who exhibits the great variance, this emotional instability, is to be declared compromised. You are no longer the Empress Elara. You are a patient. And this human? He is the pathogen." The High Guard, previously confused, now pivoted their heavy pulse cannons back toward Caspian. Their programming was simple: follow the chain of command. If the Empress was compromised, the Chancellor was in charge. The red targeting dots danced across Caspian's throat like hungry fireflies. "Varkas, you wouldn't dare," Elara hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and fear. "The people will not stand for a coup based on a blush." "The people will see what I show them," Varkas countered, tapping a holographic display on his wrist. "They will see a human spy using forbidden bioresonance to subvert our leader. They will see a threat to our very existence. Guard, remove the pathogen. Use maximum lethality." Caspian's mind raced at 1,000 miles an hour. He was outgunned, outclassed, and out of time. But humans had one thing the Valerians lacked: the ability to thrive in chaos. We didn't need a protocol to function when everything went wrong. We were at our best when the plan fell apart. "Wait!" Caspian shouted, stepping forward, placing himself between Elara and the line of fire. "You want to talk about the great variance? You want to talk about biology? You're making a massive mistake, Chancellor. A mistake that's going to cost you every ship in your fleet." Varkas paused, a cruel smirk playing on his thin lips. "Oh? And what logic does a monkey from Earth have to offer the High Council?" Caspian took a deep breath. He looked at Elara, whose skin was now pulsing with a chaotic, beautiful swirl of colors. He looked at the guards, whose sensors were struggling to categorize the data. Then, he looked up at Varkas. "You think her blushing is a weakness," Caspian said, his voice echoing with a newfound authority. "But on Earth, we know that when a heart beats this fast, it's not failing. It's supercharging. You're not looking at a broken empress. You're looking at a woman who just found something worth fighting for. And if you think I'm a pathogen, you haven't seen what happens when a human gets protective." Caspian reached into his formal diplomatic jacket. The guards tensed, their fingers tightening on their triggers. Varkas leaned forward, expecting a weapon, a plasma pistol, or a thermal detonator. Instead, Caspian pulled out a small, battered silver disc. "This is a localized sonic resonator," Caspian lied through his teeth, his voice filled with a bluff so bold it should have set the room on fire. "It's keyed to her specific biosignature. If you fire one shot at me, it triggers a feedback loop that will turn this entire palace into a black hole. You want to test my primitive tech, Varkas?" The room went deathly silent. The guards hesitated. Varkas's eyes widened, his logical mind frantically calculating the risks of unknown human dark matter technology. It was a complete fabrication. The disc was actually just a portable music player, filled with 20th century jazz, but in a room full of aliens who didn't understand the concept of a poker face. Caspian was the most dangerous man in the room. But as the standoff reached its breaking point, Elara did something that even Caspian didn't expect. She reached out and took the disc from his hand, her glowing fingers brushing his. "A black hole?" she whispered, a mischievous glint appearing in her violet eyes. "That sounds delightfully inefficient." Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the chamber were blown off their hinges. Not by the High Guard, but by a massive explosion of white light. A new faction had arrived, and they weren't wearing hegemony colors. The shockwave of the explosion threw the High Guard into a chaotic tangle of metal and limbs. As the smoke cleared, figures clad in shimmering, silver-blue tactical gear flooded the chamber. They weren't soldiers of the hegemony, but the royal resistance, the Empress's secret loyalists who had long waited for a reason to break Varkus's icy grip on the throne. "The Empress's light," their leader cried, a warrior with skin like cracked sapphire. "Protect the radiance." The throne room erupted into a symphony of neon blue plasma fire and shimmering energy shields. Caspian dived behind the living coral of the throne, pulling Elara down with him. For a moment, they were huddled in the small, scented space beneath the seat of power, the sounds of battle muffled by the thick, organic stone. "Your black hole device," Elara whispered, her violet eyes searching his in the dim light. She held the small silver disc, the one Caspian had used to bluff the Chancellor. "It's vibrating, but it's not the vibration of a weapon. It's rhythmic. It's almost like a heartbeat." Caspian leaned in, his shoulder pressing against her iridescent skin. "It's music," he admitted, a sheepish grin breaking through the terror. "It's a song about a man who loves the stars. I was going to give it to you as a diplomatic gift, but sonic resonator sounded a lot more threatening to a guy like Varkus." Elara let out a soft, melodic trill that Caspian realized was laughter. It was the first time she had laughed in a century, and the sound caused her skin to pulse with a warm, comforting amber light. "You humans are terrifying," she said. "You lie to the face of death, and you carry art into a war zone." "It's what we do," Caspian replied. "We find the beauty first, and figure out how to survive it later." High above, Chancellor Varkus was screaming orders, his voice cracking with rage. He saw his control slipping. He saw the Empress not cowering, but glowing with a strength that defied his logic. He leveled a heavy disruptor pistol toward the throne, his eyes fixed on Caspian. "If I cannot have a compliant Empress," Varkus roared, "then I will have a martyr. Die, you primitive filth!" The disruptor bolt hissed through the air, a jagged streak of black lightning. But Elara was faster. She didn't just use a shield. She stood and reached out, her hand open. The black bolt hit her palm, and instead of shattering her, it was absorbed into the swirling neon pink of her skin. She didn't just take the hit, she consumed the energy. "The variance isn't a malfunction, Varkus," Elara's voice boomed, amplified by the energy of the shot she'd just swallowed. "It's an evolution. My people have been cold for too long. This human has reminded me that stars don't just provide light, they provide heat." She raised her other hand, and a wave of pure, radiant rose-colored energy swept across the balcony. It didn't kill. It overwhelmed. Varkus was knocked backward, his system short-circuiting as the sheer emotional weight of her power flooded his cynical mind. He collapsed, his four eyes wide in a trance of sudden forced empathy. The guards froze. The resistance halted. The entire room was bathed in the warm sunset glow of an Empress who had finally found her pulse. Elara turned back to Caspian, her hand still glowing. She reached out and touched his cheek, not with the hesitation of a ruler, but with the curiosity of a woman. "The song on that disc," she whispered. "Does it have an ending?" "It does," Caspian said, his heart finally slowing down to a manageable thud. "But I think we're just getting to the best part." But as the dust settled, the Arbiter crawled out from behind a pillar, his face pale. "Your Radiance." The Chancellor was just the beginning. By triggering the edict, he sent a signal to the Silent Fleet. They're entering the atmosphere. They don't care about politics. They are programmed to cleanse the planet if the Empress shows the variance. Caspian looked out the massive crystalline windows. The sky of the Sara Prime was no longer purple. It was being blotted out by thousands of black needle-shaped ships. The sky didn't just darken. It died. The Silent Fleet was a ghost story told to Valerion children, a fleet of autonomous dreadnoughts that lived in the dark spaces between stars, answering to no man, only to the ancient code of the First Edict. Thousands of obsidian hulls descended through the clouds, their thermal dampeners turning the atmosphere into a freezing mist. They weren't here to arrest Caspian or to listen to Varkas. They were here to reset the throne room. They won't stop until every biological signature in this palace is extinguished, the Arbiter whimpered, his 4 hands covering his eyes. It's the failsafe. A ruler with a heart is a ruler who can be manipulated. The ancients decided it was better to have a dead world than an emotional one. Caspian looked up at the encroaching shadows. On Earth, we have a stubborn streak a mile wide. We don't like being told something is inevitable. Elara, Caspian said, grabbing her shoulders. Your skin, it's not just a light show, is it? It's energy. That blast you took from the Chancellor, you didn't just stop it, you ate it. You're a living battery. The Empress looked at her hands, which were still shimmering with a fierce neon-pink radiance. My people were designed to channel the power of our sun, she whispered. But for generations, we have used it only for shields, only for defense. We were taught that output was dangerous. Well, right now, dangerous is exactly what we need, Caspian said, pulling the silver disc from her hand. He quickly opened the back, revealing the human circuitry crude compared to hers, but built for one thing, amplification. If I can link this music player to the palace's main transmitter, and you provide the power, we can broadcast your variant signature. We don't fight them with lasers. We fight them with the one thing they don't have a code for. And what is that? Elara asked. Caspian looked her in the eyes, a reckless, beautiful plan forming in his mind. A soul. We're going to give those machines a heart attack. The High Guard who remained, loyal to the crown, formed a defensive circle around the throne. Outside, the first of the Silent Fleet's drop pods slammed into the palace gardens, releasing swarms of spider-like drones that began to melt through the walls. The temperature in the room plummeted. Caspian's breath came out in white plumes. He scrambled to the central console of the throne, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. He was a diplomat, not an engineer, but humans are the masters of making it work with duct tape and a dream. He ripped a fiber optic cable from the wall and jammed it into the music player's port. I need you to touch the transmitter, Elara. Caspian shouted over the sound of the palace walls buckling. Don't hold back. Think of every time you wanted to scream. Think of every time you felt lonely on that throne. Think of how you felt when I called you beautiful. The Empress stepped to the center of the room. She looked at the encroaching drones, their red sensors fixed on her. She looked at the man from Earth who had turned her world upside down in less than an hour. She placed her hands on the cold, obsidian transmitter. Caspian, she said, her voice trembling. If this doesn't work, it'll work, he promised. Because the universe has a way of rooting for the underdogs. She closed her eyes. The pink glow on her skin began to roar. It transitioned from a soft shimmer to a blinding, incandescent white-hot flame. The energy was so intense that Caspian had to shield his eyes. The music player in the console began to hum, the 20th century jazz melody vibrating through the very atoms of the palace. Suddenly, a pillar of pure, rose-colored light shot from the palace spire, piercing the clouds and striking the lead ship of the Silent Fleet. It wasn't a beam of destruction. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated emotion, a broadcast of everything Elara was feeling. The joy, the fear, the sudden, overwhelming heat of a first spark. The black ships in the sky stopped mid-descent. Their engines sputtered. Their logical processors, faced with a signal that contained the complexity of 1 billion human heartbeats, began to loop. They were trying to categorize love as a combat maneuver, but the strain was too much. The music player began to smoke. Elara's skin started to crack under the pressure of the energy. "It's too much," she cried, her voice echoing with the power of 1,000 suns. "I can't hold it alone." Caspian didn't hesitate. He ran into the storm of light and grabbed her hands, anchoring her. The energy surged through him, a white-hot jolt that felt like his soul was being rewritten. He wasn't a battery, he was a ground. As the two of them stood at the center of the light, the silent fleet did something no machine had ever done. They didn't retreat. They didn't fire. They simply turned white. Every ship in the sky began to glow with the same neon pink hue as the Empress's blush. The system was overwhelmed. The edict was broken. But as the light reached its peak, a final deafening crack echoed through the room, and the entire world went black. The darkness was not the end. It was the quiet after a storm. Caspian opened his eyes to find the throne room transformed. The terrifying red alarms were dead. The oppressive, cold ozone scent was gone, replaced by the smell of blooming jasmine, a scent Elara's skin only produced in moments of absolute peace. Outside the crystalline windows, the silent fleet was no longer a threat. The thousands of obsidian ships had drifted into a stable orbit, their hulls glowing with a soft, permanent lavender light. They were no longer hunters. They were sentinels, rewritten by a frequency they couldn't calculate. He looked down. He was still holding Elara's hands. Her silver skin was no longer metallic and cold. It felt soft, radiating a gentle warmth that made him feel like he was standing in the first light of a spring morning. The neon pink had faded to a delicate, shimmering rose that danced across her features like sunlight on water. Did we break the galaxy?" Caspian croaked, his voice raw. Elara laughed, and this time it wasn't a secret. It was a bright, soaring sound that echoed through the obsidian pillars. "No, Caspian Vance, I think we finally fixed it. The silent fleet is quiet. For the first time in 10,000 years, the hegemony is not governed by a code. It is governed by a choice." The royal arbiter stood nearby, staring at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. He wasn't checking his scanners. He was looking at the way the light hit the floor. "The Chancellor's signal has been overridden," the arbiter whispered. "The High Council is reporting a systemic outbreak of empathy. They don't know whether to arrest us or thank us." Elara stepped closer to Caspian, the distance between them now a bridge rather than a barrier. "They will do neither," she said firmly. "They will learn. Just as I did." She looked at the small charred remains of the music player. "Your species is small, Caspian. Your lives are short. And yet you carry enough fire to warm the entire void. How do you live with so much feeling?" Caspian smiled, reaching up to brush a silver lock of hair from her violet eyes. "We don't have a choice. It's the only way we know how to survive. The Empress of the most powerful sector in space did something that would have been a death sentence only an hour ago." She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. In that touch, the HFY spirit was more than just a legend, it was a physical reality. Humanity hadn't conquered the Valerion Hegemony with ships or gold. They had conquered it by being the only ones brave enough to be vulnerable. "The trade agreements can wait until tomorrow," Elara whispered. "Today, I want to hear the rest of that song." Caspian looked out at the stars, knowing that Earth was safe, and the galaxy was finally beautifully inefficient. That's the power of the human heart, guys. It's the one thing in the universe you can't program. If you enjoyed this journey into the stars and the secrets of the Valerian Hegemony, do me a massive favor. Smash that like button, share this story with a fellow sci-fi fan, and make sure to subscribe to the channel HFY Soundscape so you never miss a tale of human defiance. We've got plenty more stories that prove why being human is the greatest superpower of all. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars.